Hello, friends of Bill W. and other friends. You have landed on Sober Speak. My name is John M. I am an alcoholic, and I will be the cruise director for this episode today. This episode is brought to you by Dawn C. and Christina. Dawn C. and Christina went to our website, soberspeak.com, clicked on the Donate tab, and made a contribution. Thank you so much, Dawn C. and Christina, for your generous contribution. This episode is for you. We are glad you are all here with us today, especially newcomers. Newcomers, that is, both to recovery and to the podcast as a whole. This is a show about recovery, centered around the Alcoholics Anonymous 12 Steps of Recovery. This program is for anyone considering recovery, interested in recovery, or actually trudging the road of happy destiny of recovery today. Consider Sober Speak, if you will, your meeting between meetings. Please remember, we do not speak for any 12-step community. We represent only ourselves. We are here to share our experience, strength, and hope with those who wish to come along for the ride. Take what you want and leave the rest at the curb. But that's enough of all that stuff. Let's go ahead and dive into the episode today. So, I have my friend Tony D with me here today. Tony, welcome to Sober Speak.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
I have asked Tony to bring in something that, and everyone struggles with this. Tony even talked about it before we began. Picking one thing out of the literature that means something to you to read. And I know, Tony, and I want to talk about this in just a little bit, I know he reads a lot of the literature, and I have written proof of that. But I'm going to let you read whatever you brought along today, Tony.
Well, as you mentioned, it's really hard. There's so much great stuff in the big book and the 12 and 12, but this is what I hung on to. So on page 44 from We Agnostics. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope that we were not true alcoholics. But after a while, we had to face the fact that we must find a spiritual basis of life, or else.
So, talk about that a little bit. I mean, why does that, out of all the readings, stand out to you?
Because I think the biggest hurdle, obstacle, hump for me to get over as I came into Alcoholics Anonymous was facing the fact that I'm an alcoholic. Mm-hmm. I would rather have had any other kind of torture or affliction. I mean, all of the connotations that I had.
Yeah, and what are those connotations? Because you're not the only one who has them.
Yeah, the dirty old man that lives under a bridge in a brown paper bag, and homeless, and failure. All of those things. Those things did not look like me. And on top of that, my father is an alcoholic, and he's been sober since October of 83.
Ah, so you had some exposure to the, and I'm assuming, has he been sober through Alcoholics Anonymous?
He did. Okay. Got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I remember my mother telling me when I was a young man, you better be careful, because there's some of this stuff in your family. Yeah. And I always thought, yeah, but I'm not weak like they are.
Right.
So it really was a huge barrier for me to be able to face the fact that I had all of this evidence that I was successful in life, and I was not a failure alcoholic.
Yeah.
And it was tough to swallow.
Yeah, so I want to dive into that a little bit, because you have had some measure of success, we should say. I guess it's all relative, right? Mm-hmm. But from my perspective, within the business world, right? And I know you're a very, you talk about being a competitive guy, if you will. And a lot of that competitiveness bled over into the business world for you. Sure. So Talk about that a little bit, like how your alcoholism played into that, and then maybe how it's different now on the other side, and how you see it today.
Well, I think the first thing that comes to my mind listening to you is it's all about faith and my relationship with God. And as you mentioned, I played competitive sports most of my life. That's my mindset. I grew up in Euless, Texas, which was a small town in the 80s, and we had a terrific football team, and the NFL was on strike, and SMU was on probation. So if you wanted to watch football in Texas, high school was all you had, and we were hometown heroes. I mean, and celebrities, literally.
And Euless, for those who don't know, is a smaller town between Dallas and Fort Worth. It's getting bigger all the time now.
It all just kind of blends together.
Right,
now.
It does.
But athletic competition was at the center of everything I did.
Was there some particular sport that you were more drawn to?
Well, of course, if you're in Texas in the 80s, you got to play football, right? And I talked to my both. I have two boys, and they're big into soccer. And if I could go back and do things over again, I probably would choose a different path. But I mean, I had a ball. Athletics and then faith, as a little boy, I grew up in the Southern Baptist Church. I was baptized when I was 6 years old, and, I remember, being explained to me by the Sunday school teacher that, if you pray this prayer, you'll live forever in, paradise with Jesus. And if you don't, you'll suffer for eternity in hell. And what 6-year-old is going to make, choose door number 2.
Right.
All through, even after college, really hard working in the church and part of the church. And so I guess that I kind of came to believe that I was on God's team. And I was wearing God's jersey, and if I worked so hard for all the things that I believed were right, things should go my way.
Right.
And life doesn't work that way. So there was a time where, I had faith, and I lost it. But that competitive drive was always there. Still is to some degree. I'm not a sore loser,
right?
But I like to play and I like to win,
right? And so coming, and we'll go back in a little bit, but just I've seen a lot of people in the program before who come in with that very hard competitive drive, especially in business, right? In business is everything, so to speak. And then they get sober and they realize that, well, yeah, I still want to do well in business, but it's not everything. There's another aspect of life. Did you go through any of that when you got sober?
Oh, sure. And it's a double-edged situation because there's, one of the things I've heard in the rooms that stuck with me was there are no big deals in life. And that's really good advice for me. It's really good words for me because before I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and before I got sober, on the scale of 1 to 10, I tried to make every day an 11. And, people get in your way and things happen, and that took me to a 0. And so I spent all my time at 0 or 11, emotionally, and spiritually. So,
what got you up to the 11? Was it business deals, or was it just?
I really think that it had something to do with my upbringing. Extremely responsible. I'm the oldest of 3, and as I mentioned, my father was an alcoholic, and so Mom had to hold it all together. Okay. And I played a role different than most kids, or a role that kids probably shouldn't have to play in perfect circumstances. I had to be a grown-up, way ahead of time.
Yeah.
To make sure everything's all buttoned up and little brother and little sister don't get into any trouble. I had to start playing that role when I was in the, 5th or 6th grade, as I recall.
Wow. So your responsibility level was heightened before it should have been.
Probably unhealthy.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So, all right. So let's talk then a little bit about your background. Right. I know you've talked about your mom, your father. You're the oldest of 3. Talk to me about your background and where you came from, just so people can identify with that. And also, just real quick, if you could give your sobriety date, if you would, please.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I surrendered on May the 20th, 2012. I had my last drink at the Lubbock, Texas International Airport. I think there's one flight from Mexico that comes in every day. And I'm a native Texan. I was born in Texas, grew up in North Texas, church-going family. I feel like...
Did you feel when you were growing up like everything was okay, or did you have some sort of sense that it was not okay?
I felt like we had the greatest family ever.
Gotcha.
I felt like, we lived in a great neighborhood. In fact, I still am in touch with some people who lived in that neighborhood back in those times, and we talk about the wonder years, kind of memories that we have there. Dad was more of an entrepreneur. So we had good times and tough times.
Right.
And Mom finally, figured out that I guess that she needed to get a career in nursing when it came time to try to hold it all together.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I growing up in North Texas and playing sports all year long. I mean, and all the people that I ran with, were people that went to church and people that played sports with me. And that was life.
Mm-hmm. So when did you have your first drink?
I really am not sure. I think that my dad's dad, believe he and his wife were alcoholics as well. They both have passed away. But there was a lot of drinking at their house, and their house was, one of my favorite places, in the entire world. It was
Very social kind of place? Or?
It was a place of peace and safety, a place where I was always welcome, where I didn't have to play a role or succeed. It was a place where I could just be. But I remember... my grandfather probably got me to take a sip of beer or two, before I was a teenager.
Yeah.
But I don't really remember that. But he did, I remember he drank ancient age, whiskey, I think it is. And he had the half-gallon glass bottle, and I knew where it was in the cabinet underneath the sink. And he would sit in his chair and he would hand me his glass and tell me, put a jigger of whiskey in there and 2 waters, and I'd run go get it for him and take it back to him. That's what he worked hard. Mm-hmm. He was a cobbler and repaired boots and shoes in McKinney. Mm-hmm. And he would work 11 hours, 6 days a day, 6 days a week, and then he would come home, sit in his chair, and
drink. Relax before he goes back and does it the next day.
That's right.
All right. So, but when do you remember your first kind of? Do you remember your first drunk?
Yeah, well, there's one that really comes to mind. It actually was on my first business trip. Was kind of a
really? Okay, so it sounds to me then like you kind of got through your teenage years and you got through college.
Oh yeah,
without being scathed.
In fact, there was no drinking in high school. The crowd that I ran with, we were all really good, all American kids. We were church going kids. I feel like I had a special. Group of friends in my class and my age. And I run into like teachers and things from time to time who will still say the same thing. But it was kind of cool to be good kids.
Yeah, yeah.
And we were a fun crowd, and I felt like people wanted to be with us. We were friends with everyone. So you know how you have the stereotypical, jocks and ropers and dope heads or whatever. Yeah. We were friends with everybody. We welcomed everybody and included everybody. So what was your question?
So my question was when did you have your first drunk? And then you're kind of sort of talking about after college.
So I went through high school. My circle, none of us drank, and when people did, we took care of them. And then I went to college.
What do you mean by took care of them?
Made sure they got home safe. Made sure they didn't get in any trouble.
Gotcha. Oh, you don't mean beat them up?
No.
Okay, just wondering.
We
in some cultures,
cared for them.
Right? In some cultures, when you say we took care of them,
but that's the thing that I think was really neat is we didn't separate ourselves from people. We were there at Grapevine Lake on the point in the middle of the night with the bonfire and all this, the trunks of the cars raised with all playing the same radio station really loud, and people were doing what they do. We were there with all of them. We weren't partaking in any of that, a lot of us.
And so, a lot of what I'm picking up from this is, like you said earlier, there is a typical impression, if you will, of an alcoholic and how they were growing up.
Yep.
They started smoking weed when they're 13. They're drinking heavily by the time they're 15, 16. But the truth is that we come from all sorts of backgrounds, right? And you are breaking the mold here, and I just want people to see that. So let's go up to college, or right after. So you got through college.
Yeah.
You're a pretty good kid through college, sounds like.
Well, that's where that's probably where I began, the takeoff of my drinking career. But I think there's an interesting thing that comes to mind as I talked about the small town high school football and being celebrities in the community.
Like
and then,
Friday Night Lights.
You bet. And then you go off to college and you become student number 103465531 and nobody cares.
Right.
That it brings to mind, I've heard alcoholism is a disease. I was very skeptical about that for a long time, and I've heard it's a disease of feelings and perceptions. And so you get to college and you're used to being treated like you're a big deal, and now you're just another student. I think there are feelings in that transition that become uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
I drank socially. I had friends that drank. I drank only beer, and I never got in any trouble. Mm-hmm. As long as I drank beer, I would get sleepy and go to bed before, I would get to a point where I lost my senses or did anything stupid. So that worked really well for me through college.
So even all the way through college, you had really I guess what you would call the craving that happens once you take that first drink, it had not developed quite yet, correct?
Well, I guess I'd have to say, because of my upbringing in Southern Baptist Church, drinking was bad, right? It was bad.
Right.
Dancing and drinking. And, even if you go to summer camp, the boys have a time for the swimming pool and the girls have a time for the swimming pool, and they don't mix, right? So I think I stiff-armed it for a long time, especially with my parents' background and what I went through, and the self-thought that I'm not weak like they are, and combine that with the 11-year-old grown-up responsibility. I had to keep it, together. That's the expectation that I put on myself. But I remember in college that it's funny you asked that. One of the things we used to love to do on Thursday night, we went to a place called Crossroads, and so did every other college student.
And which college was it?
This was Stephen F. Austin
Oh, yeah,
Nacogdoches.
SFA. Yeah.
And Crossroads had quarter beer night on Thursday night, and they usually had live music, and sometimes they had, really big acts. Like I saw Eric Johnson there one time. I think the Steve Miller Band was there one time. But quarter beer night on Thursday night at Crossroads, I would find myself on Sunday afternoon looking forward to that. And that's probably not normal. After I've spent, all weekend drinking beer since the prior Thursday, and shutting it down Thursday afternoon to get ready for the week, I'm already thinking about next Thursday. If you have that, you might be an alcoholic.
Right.
That's not normal.
Right. So you got past college, and now when did it start to pick up?
Well, so I got out of college, and I had a job, and I continued to drink occasionally on weekends, beer only, for the next several years. I took my first business trip with the company that I'm still with, for over 28 years.
Wow.
Back in 1990.
Okay.
And we were at an Embassy Suites. So this was a group of us that came from all over the country for a training class. Mm-hmm. And we met at this Embassy Suites, and they still do this some places where they have the manager's cocktail hour or the happy hour in the lobby, and we were meeting and greeting each other, and I was having a discussion with somebody else who was there and asked what they were drinking, and they were having a gin and tonic. And
look good?
Well, they said it was terrific, so I thought I would try one of those, and I did. And I drank it down just like I would a beer. So I had to go get another one because it disappeared pretty quick.
Right.
And, then after that, we all went to dinner. And I remember all of us ordering food, but between the time that we ordered and the time that the food showed up, it hit me. And I wasn't able to eat. I was just out, and I remember everything, but, I just felt so bad that my head was in my plate, and people took me back to the hotel, and I slept it off.
Yeah. So that's the first time you remember kind of
that's the first
going
one
over the limits.
Yep,
so to
that's
speak.
the first one that sticks out in my mind where, something happened to me where I did not have control.
And so take me past that. So, so how many years was it from that point until you actually made your first meeting in Alcoholics Anonymous?
Oh, a long time. 22 years.
Gotcha. So can you summarize those 22 years for me?
Well, I think, again, the strong sense of responsibility and alcohol being a bad thing. So around that time, 4 years after that time, I got married. Mm-hmm. And I got married to a girl whose parents were alcoholic. And I made a promise, that there would be no drinking.
When you say no drinking like at the wedding or in the house or a little bit of both?
I'm not going to be a drinker.
Oh, you're not going to be a drinker, right?
And it was, once in a while.
Because she knew the dangers of alcoholism as well.
That's right.
From her parents.
That's right.
Now, were you drinking during your courtship with her?
Yes.
Okay.
But never around her.
Gotcha.
So we would do typical 20-something-year-old guy stuff.
Right.
Poker games and, go to the Rangers game. And we still played a lot of sports together, softball, and have a beer afterwards and things like that. But, it was never, I got to have, alcohol around. It was just kind of always there for certain things, certain events, but it wasn't a need at all.
Yeah.
I think so. We got married, and I had made a promise that there would be no drinking. And from time to time, she accompanied me on business events special occasions, I would ask for her permission to have a beer or two, and that's kind of how it went for, the next from, when we got married in 94 to 97 or 98.
Okay. So something turned in 97 or 98?
It did, and this, it's hard to explain all this in the context, but you remember I talked about, I was on God's team.
Right.
And I was wearing his jersey.
Right.
And I thought that meant things were supposed to work out my way. And so we, right after we got married, we moved from Texas to Salt Lake City. Mm-hmm. And we were on our own.
When you say on your own, no family support around?
Yeah, it's like she's an identical twin, and it's the first time she'd lived away from her sister, and we were away from family. We lived there for 3 years, and then we moved to California. Okay. And both of these assignments for me were new manufacturing facility startups. Mm-hmm. Where I had a management position and really heavy workloads, really significant expectations, really stressful.
Do you have kids at this time?
We my first one was born while we were in Utah, and when we got to California, he was about 6 months old. So we in California, there's a very specific memory that pops up where I was feeling really frustrated, working really hard, lots of hours, tired, and honestly, probably you could wrap it all up into self-pity, right? And I came home one night after a really long day. It was about 9:00, and in my mind, I had forecasted, what needed to happen. And what needed to happen was I needed to have a pretty playful, happy wife meet me at the door. Right. And serve me something hot to eat and have a nice evening and go to sleep. And that's not what I got. And when I look back on this, and I put myself in her shoes, how tired and lonely, she must have been. And, she's moved in a place where she doesn't know anybody. She's got a 6-month-old. Right. So, she's not sleeping well at night. And I'm gone most of the time. So, when I came home that night, she was wiped out, tired, and ready to go to bed, and I'm on my own for dinner, and I didn't even get to see my son, and I just became so angry that and part of what led up to this was we'd had a business function where I got voluntold to get the alcohol inventory. So I had purchased an assortment of things for this event, and I had the leftovers in a box in my garage.
Wow.
And so I went straight out to the garage, and I drank straight out of a vodka bottle and just really angry.
Gotcha.
So up until that point, I had really stiff-armed my drinking and had been real responsible with it.
Yeah.
I gave myself over to it in that moment.
So you crossed another line.
I crossed the line, and it was on.
And did you know it that night, or did you know it in the coming weeks after that?
No, I knew that night. I was done because, again, I'm on God's team, and they're holding me on every play, and he's not throwing a flag.
It's not working out the way you wanted it to.
It's not.
All right, let me do this little thing here in the middle of this, all right, and we'll get back. We'll get back to our conversation with Tony D, TD, in just a moment. Just a reminder, you are listening to Sober Speak. You can find us on the worldwide interweb. I think I've heard you say that before. Interweb. At soberspeak.com. There you will find 25 or so other episodes you can listen to for free. You can also click on the donate button if you would like, if you move. Please remember, SoberSpeak is self-supporting through our own contributions. We are not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution. We do not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorse nor oppose any causes. And please feel free, and I wish you would reach out to us at feedback@soberspeak.com. Now back to Tony D. All right, so you've come out of this. You've drank at the world, so to speak, maybe for the first time.
Yep.
You realize that you have unleashed a monster, if you will, in your world. Now, and so how far was it from that point until you actually got into AA? How many years is that now?
It still would have been 16 years away.
16 years away?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So you had... All right. What do you want to reference during that 16 years before we get into your recovery?
Well,
I will ask you.
Sorry, 12 years.
Okay, 12 years. 12
Yeah,
years.
yeah.
Before you get there, I have heard you tell a story before, which absolutely cracks me up. Okay. Do you know where I'm going with this?
No, I don't.
Okay.
But I'm sure I'll remember.
I hope so. You said, talking about blackouts, you said you came to one night and you were in the corner of your bedroom.
Oh,
you remember
yeah,
that?
yeah,
All right.
yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Can I let you take it from there?
Yeah, that's whenever we read the section in the book that talks about alcohol brings up connotations of happy times and joyous fellowship with others, and it's the beer commercial section of the book.
Yeah.
And, for a lot of people, that's true.
Yeah.
And what always came to my mind is I can, still see a mental movie of this commercial. And I don't know what the product is, but it's a high-end vodka. And it shows, these lovely young couples in somebody's backyard. And the ladies, all have these pretty colorful sundresses on. And
Conviviality, I think,
yes,
is what the book
conviviality
calls
is
it.
one
Yeah.
of those words.
The sundresses.
And they're holding, very pretty, colorful drinks, and all the guys are standing around the grill, high-fiving each other, just having this great time. And that's this vodka commercial.
Yeah.
But my commercial doesn't turn out that way. My commercial looks more like waking up to the sound of my own pee hitting the floor in the corner of my bedroom. And
Wait a second. Let's stop there because I just for whatever reason that's a great description. Waking up to the sound
yeah.
of your own pee hitting the carpet in the corner. Now, why did you go to the corner? Do you have any idea?
I don't know. I woke up, was already there when I woke up. But the best part is, also hearing from the background, what are you doing? Right? In the middle of the night.
What does it look like I'm doing? I'm going to the restroom.
Yeah, that's what my commercial looked like. One time.
Oh! Just out of curiosity, how did you repair that? Do you remember? Did you just end up soaking it up?
Well, I hid my drinking from everybody that I could.
Yeah.
Socially, I drank beer during those times because beer would never get me in trouble. But I made a promise to the woman that I married, and so I became sneaky, with my drinking. And, one of the things that stuck with me, which I found out was not true, there was a movie where about a woman who was an alcoholic, and it said in there that she drank vodka because you can't smell it.
Yeah.
Right. So that's another, if you think about things like that, if you notice things like that,
right.
You might be an alcoholic too.
Right.
So I thought we would try that.
Right. I think that's alcoholics who started that because I don't think anybody else believes it.
Yeah, it's not true. So she thought, this was during one of those startups that we had, and tons of hours and tons of stress. she thought that's what that was all about. And I'm sure that had something to do with it too.
Gotcha.
But there was more to the story.
Yeah. Okay. So, during that 12 years, obviously it picked up from there. So talk to me then about like how you got in touch or how you found Alcoholics Anonymous, your first meeting, what it was like for you, the short period, I guess, leading up to that.
Well, I guess before then, there's after California, we moved to Hawaii, and
was this another startup?
no, this was an existing facility that I went to lead.
But it was a job with the same company,
Yeah,
so you got another
on
transfer.
Oahu.
Right.
It was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I'm still.
And how many kids? Do you have another child by this point?
Yeah, we do. We had Brinson was born in California in '99. So we go to Hawaii and we have a 6-year-old and a 2.5-year-old. About no. Sorry, a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old.
Okay.
When we go to Hawaii, and then we got back to Texas was what their ages were. But in Hawaii was the first time that my wife, she busted me, sneaking, drinking, and at that time I started to go to counseling. I remember somebody gave me a big book. I tried to read it. It didn't make any sense to me at all, and I really. My sense of responsibility
That's
kicked back
interesting.
in.
Someone gave you a big book and it didn't make sense because I know you're a very sharp guy. Right?
Well, that's nice.
Yeah, I know you are. You're a very sharp man, and so the fact that and I know obviously you got through college, right? You know how to read books, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
But you're reading this thing that's at 3rd grade level, but it's kind of going over your head.
Yeah, I thought it was ridiculous. Talking about jaywalking and men with no legs and Ma, ain't it grand the wind stopped blowing. It just I couldn't get too far through it.
Right.
But my sense of responsibility kicked in, and I really worked hard on managing this again, and keeping it in control.
Managing this again, managing your drinking is
Yes,
what you mean, right?
yes.
Yeah.
I mean,
so you wanted to control and enjoy. Like, were you thinking about controlling it in terms of quitting controlling, or just having a couple beers and being able to stop?
I developed. I tried different things, and there's a part in the book that talks about all of these things we tried, and the list goes on.
Drinking natural wine or whatever.
I just really limited the amount. That I put myself. I'm going to make a decision that I'm going to buy the small bottle, and I'm only going to allow myself to have that one small bottle between, on the weekend, and then that was going to be it. And I would grit myself through the rest of the week.
And would you drink the small bottle at home, or were you drinking it out of the eyesights of your wife?
At home. At home, but out
so
of
as
the
long
eyesights.
as both.
I was sneaking at home.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there was a period there that I just really mustered up the strength to resist and to control it, and then we moved to Texas, and that also
Another job transfer.
I
bet you were glad to be back home.
We were, and I had promised her. It's funny, when we got married, we talked about where should we do our honeymoon, and we wanted to go to a beach, and we looked at Hawaii, and we looked at Cozumel, and we paid for most of our wedding, and we needed to pay off some school loans and things like that. So we chose Cozumel because it was much cheaper, and at that time she said, "Well, you got to promise to take me to Hawaii someday."
Well,
and so we did that for 3.5 years. But we also, the day we agreed together to move from Texas to Utah, she made me promise that we'll get back someday, because she had a family and a twin sister. So now we're back home, and everything's going to be better, right? Everything's going to be great, and these expectations of what life should be like, and life turned up just life, and
and you have to take you wherever you go, right?
I do. Wherever I go, there I am.
There I am.
But after that, after we moved home, and all of those Norman Rockwell type images of what life was supposed to be like, weren't quite what I pictured them to be. And the drinking took over. Again, I gave myself over to it, and that's when it finally reached a point at the end of 2010 where my wife said, "That's it. I've had enough, and we've got to do something about this." So she had a friend who knew somebody who'd been sober for over 20 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. They were close friends, and she got me his phone number and said, "You call this guy or else." So I did, and I started meeting with this guy, and I started going.
So were you, at that point then, did you feel dejected, like this is the worst thing could ever happen to me? Did you feel some ray of hope?
No, I felt totally ashamed. I felt
like a loser.
Oh yeah,
for a competitor,
because
especially.
Somebody thinks I'm an alcoholic,
right?
And because somebody else thinks I'm an alcoholic, the feelings of shame about that were enormous, and that's still a long way from me getting to the point, where I would accept that I am one.
Yeah,
and I remember the very first meeting I ever went to was November the 2nd, 2010, at the Frisco group in the trailer behind the church.
How did you find the group? Was it
like
online?
I called this guy and he said, you need to go to meetings, and you need to go to meetings as a substitute for your drinking, and which didn't make any sense to me at all.
Right.
But through the perspective of it's a feelings and perception disease, today that makes total sense to me. There's a sense of relief, when I walk into a meeting. I'm with my people, and we've all been miraculously rescued from this hopeless situation. But I remember that meeting. I chose that meeting because it's close to my office. And, he's talking about you got to go to meetings. And I'm thinking, do you know how busy I am? I mean, I have two young boys. I have, an executive position. I work 60 hours a week. I coach my oldest son's soccer team. And, I'm trying to be a dad. I can't go to these meetings. Right. So I'm looking around and I don't want to go anywhere in my community because somebody might know me, somebody might recognize me. So the first one I went to was the 7 a.m. and I got there real early. And that was another thing that comes to mind that's important. I believed that, and I learned back in college somehow, that as long as you could answer the bell the next day, you're good.
Right.
You don't have a problem.
Right, like you're functional alcoholic.
That's right. As long as you can answer the bell the next day, you don't have a problem. You're definitely not an alcoholic, right? As long as you can make it all work. But I showed up early. I drove through the parking lot 3 or 4 times, to look for, is there a car here that I recognize? Any bumper stickers or parking stickers that might... there might be somebody here that might know who I am. And
at that time of year, was it dark or was it light?
No, it was dark. This was November.
Yeah,
right?
November.
Early November.
Right.
So it was dark, and I showed up and I just felt awful, and nothing made sense to me. But I have, this sense of responsibility. I made this promise to my wife. I've let her down. And, I'm sure God had a hand in it, too.
Did she know you were getting up going to those meetings?
Yeah, of course. I had T-shirts made, that I'm meeting with John, and I'm going to these meetings. But, I got to where I was really proud of myself if I made 2 meetings a week. And, but, just the thought of, going to those meetings, it made me sick.
Yeah.
And
once again, it was the I'm a loser.
Yeah,
and
it's not.
How did I get
not
to
alcoholic?
This place?
I mean, how about the flesh-eating, bacteria or something like that?
Right.
Not alcoholic, and I guess the things that matter there is, and I changed sponsors a little bit after that period. In the rooms, people in there reached me with, there are people in there who are like me, and there are people in there who are very different than me. But telling me about how my insides feel. The voices in the meetings reached me. And I had enough respect for my sponsor. I didn't want to disappoint him.
The accountability thing. That's where it actually came into play for you.
So through the, the meetings and steps with my sponsor, this crazy miracle happened. Where one day I spent so much time and energy about how am I going to drink and not get in trouble? How much inventory do I have? Where is it? How am I going to manage it? Every day revolved around being able to successfully drink, to suddenly one day realizing that was just gone. It was just not there anymore.
Right. You were placed in a position of neutrality, like the book says.
It was just not there anymore.
Right.
And when I recognized that...
So that was in November you came in. How long did it take before you kind of got to that particular position?
That was still... April or so of 2012 when that happened. So that's like a year and a half later.
Okay, gotcha.
So I, drug myself to a few meetings a week and tried to work the steps with my sponsor for a year and a half. Continued to drink. Had some periods of sobriety, picked up a bunch of chips, but really struggled. And somewhere in there is when I recognized, well, who am I to have an authority on what an alcoholic is? That if you can answer the bell in the morning, if you can have a long and successful career, if you can and work your butt off in the church. I mean, through all of this time, I was still, a Sunday school teacher and leading the worship team and playing guitar and singing and filling any role that needed to be filled at church. I mean, my resume looked terrific. But who am I to say, the book talks about a mental obsession and a physical craving, for alcohol. It talks about it as an allergy, which I also thought was just a joke. Just what a weak excuse. And that goes back to, the voices saying, you better be careful. Well, I'm not weak like they are. I'm not even an authority on how I'm wired, right? If somebody's allergic to peanuts, they can't help it. It's the way their body reacts. Who am I to say that what's true and what's not? But years and years and years of life experience has proven to me that I am vulnerable to alcohol. It is, to me, what kryptonite is to Superman, right? And
you have a Superman shirt on
today.
I do.
That stands for sober.
Good. So we'll talk about then. So now we're up to sobriety. You're in sobriety. You've got a sponsor. And like you said, it was like a year and a half really kind of started to sink in, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. So did you start going to things besides 7 a.m. meetings at that point? Did you start to branch out? Talk about your experience in sobriety.
Yeah, I had started to branch out before then, and I actually, my home group is in South Lake. Mm-hmm. And that's where my sponsor is, and that's where I met him. But most of my meetings are in Frisco, and that's because I live 35 miles from where I work. Mm-hmm. But it suddenly became, how do I figure out how to get to a meeting every time I can.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Instead of,
when do I have to?
I went to 2 this week,
right. and
being really proud of myself.
Right.
Because like I said, you guys reached me. I knew that the pieces fit. I knew that what you were saying in those rooms applied to me. Not everything, of course, but that's one of the great things about it is not everybody's going to identify with everybody.
You're right.
And not everything that's said in a meeting is going to be needed for everybody.
Right.
But it's definitely needed for somebody.
Right. You know, speaking of perspective, I've heard you say something about it, and I've thought about it many times, actually. You don't know this. You're finding it out for the first time here during the podcast. But you have a perspective thing which you talk about, and that is where traffic is concerned. Why don't you go ahead and share that, and because it's helped me.
Well, I could talk a lot about traffic.
Well,
can you lead me a little closer?
You say that there's a kind of a Jedi. That's another thing. Is a Jedi trick that you use for traffic when you're in traffic.
Well, there's lots of Jedi mind tricks that I use on myself, which is kind of related to the reading that I brought in. I have to be constantly reminded what I am, and I have to constantly be reminded what I need to do about it. And the way that I make that kind of fun and also effective for me is I use these Jedi mind tricks. And, you know, traffic is just a great example of how you're dealing with life as to how you respond to traffic. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I lived half a lifetime thinking that everybody sees any situation the same way, mm-hmm. that they all have the same perspective that I do. Mm-hmm. And that's the definition of self-centeredness.
Right.
But if you have, you know, one traffic example would be, you know, 4 cars heading towards a traffic signal that turns yellow, you're going to get 3 different responses to that at least.
Right.
But they're all seeing the same thing.
Right.
And, you know, that was a real awakening for me that life's not a math equation where, you know, the variables present themselves and you all reach the same answer through the same process. It doesn't work that way. And, you know, I can tell how I'm doing spiritually because, you know, what I read, you must develop a basis of living spiritually or else. By how I respond to traffic. There's always going to be an asshole in traffic. And, you know, my natural instinct is to fantasize that I have laser vision and could chop off or shave off the back, you know, the bottom third of his back tires and cause him to crash. But, you know, one of the things that I've been taught in the rooms is to respond differently to that. Well, first of all, not react to it, mm-hmm. and to respond to it. And instead of telling that guy he's number one, you know, remembering that person is God's kid too. And, you know, ease his suffering, whatever it is. You know, that helps me so much because once the anger engine gets, you know, kicks into gear, it only picks up speed, you know, and everything piles on the top of it. So I don't know if that's what you were thinking about.
Actually, it's not, but that was good. The other thing that I've actually heard you say before is, I am not in traffic.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
I'm not in traffic. I
am traffic.
I am traffic.
I'm not stuck in traffic. I am traffic.
Right.
And that's, you know, this whole idea the book talks about self-centeredness. We think that is the root of our troubles. And, you know, I've developed a new perspective that I can't turn off my self-centeredness. Mm-hmm. Nobody can. Mm-hmm. We are self-centered by nature and we don't even know it. And, you know, that idea of I'll be late because I'm stuck in traffic, it's all about you. It's all about me, right? No, if I weren't out there, you know, I'm contributing to the traffic.
I'm part of the issue.
In another way that shows up, the most practical way that you can see self-centeredness that I've noticed is in dealing with an elevator. if you've ever been on an elevator where you come down and the doors open and people try to get on before you get off,
Right.
everybody knows you should empty it before you fill it.
Don't they know?
But those people that are waiting for the elevator, they're thinking about them.
That's right.
It's coming for me.
That's right.
Right? No, it serves us all.
It does. All right, the last thing I want to talk about here before we sign off, and that is you I don't know if you call it a reputation. That sounds bad, but you have you are known in our group, at least known by me, as kind of the text guy, okay? Oh. And what I mean by that, remember earlier I said we have written proof that you actually read the literature, because I know you do.
Yeah.
Because if I were to go back through my text, I could probably bring up, I don't know, couple hundred different texts that you have sent out, and you don't send it just to me, right? You send it to anybody else. And by the way, if you're not on Tony's text list, you should be nicer to Tony. And he will put you on his list.
Well,
but Tony sends out text on. It depends on your schedule. I would say every day, but it's close to every day.
80%.
All right, you send out snippets, if you will, mainly from the literature. Every once in a while, I see things that are outside the literature that are actually funny. But so, tell me how that got started. What your process for selecting those things is, and
oh wow, what an interesting question. So we talked earlier about Jedi mind tricks that I use things on myself because I need to be reminded of what I am and what I need to do. And going to meetings is great, but we can't always go to meetings, and working with others is great. But when we talked earlier about in meetings there's somebody for everybody, the few that I send a text to, there are people that I can really hear, okay, when I'm in those meetings. There are people that communicate in a way that I really hear and I really identify with. And that's how you got on the list, right? And your summit. And the reason that I do that is because it keeps me accountable to keeping my nose in the literature, and it keeps me in contact with other alcoholics.
That's great. So, when you pick it out, is it just kind of random? Is it part of your just whatever you come across?
No, I'm not like hunting. I'd call it an inspiration. I don't know,
something that hits you that day.
Yeah. Well, I do. I have a process. So, like and you've heard me say this many, many times. Another Jedi mind trick or picture that I use is, it's important for me every day, as close to the beginning of the day as I can, to hand the keys over to God and crawl in the back seat. Believe there is a God. I know it's not me, and I must have His help, or else. So part of what I do is I have a prayer and meditation routine that I do as part of growing my spiritual life, and I have my nose in, and I have a system. Like I read 2 pages a day, at least, from our literature almost every day. And when something strikes me, I share that with a few folks that, like I said, I really can hear, and I enjoy doing it. But I guess the root of it is a little bit selfish, right? Because it keeps me vigilant,
right?
In what I'm supposed to be doing every day.
Right. Yeah, it's selfish in a good way, and I completely get it. And I said the last thing earlier, but I do want you to address before you leave something we talked about here before you actually got on the podcast real quick, and that is you talked about how when you were first sober, listening to tapes or things like to kind of keep you in the groove. So talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think when I first came in, I was really trying to figure this thing out. And even as I tried to work the steps, a management, analytical, mathematical kind of mind, charts and diagrams, I was really trying to figure figure this out. And I'm sorry. What was your question again?
When you first got into the group, or when you first got into the program, you talked about listening to particular tapes and stuff.
There we go. So I found that once in a while I heard something that really stuck with me in a meeting, and once in a while I would see something in the book that I would agree with or that would stick out to me. But I started hunting for AA speakers, and I found that there's stuff on the internet.
Right.
And one of the first ones I heard was Jerry Jones, from Lake Whitney. He's passed away now, but he was a Texas lawyer, and he told his story and that was a huge part of me softening my position on whether or not I'm an alcoholic. It was, I gave in a little bit, resisting or believing that I'm not, I'm too strong or too responsible or too successful or whatever to be an alcoholic. He told this story about his dog and his dog getting in a fight with a wild hog, and it not working out so good for the dog, but the dog would do it anyway, right? And so I listened to that over and over, and then I found more and more. So that kind of allowed me to meditate on things, to think about things, to hear it from another perspective, and allowed me more access to this design for living, which is a whole another thing we didn't talk about. But I felt like, for half a lifetime, you'll hear people say once in a while that I feel is very true, that I was absent the day they handed out the instruction manual for life, the owner's manual. And I have found the instructions that we're given in the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous is that instruction manual for life. It is a design for living that I have found to be extremely rewarding and successful.
And one more thing, I keep going on here because I'm interested in this, right? You talk about the big book and the owner's manual for life, but and I know you came from a religious background, right? A religious, whatever in churchy kind of background.
Yep.
Have you been able to dovetail those two together since coming to the program?
Probably not in the way that you'd be asking that question. I find that I think what I hear in the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous is very consistent with what I heard, for the first half of my life, heavily involved in church. And I think that there's also a lot of man-made drama and self-centeredness everywhere you go, even in church.
Right.
And I'm not opposed to it at all, but my spiritual growth has come through, if you read pages 86, 87, and 88 in the big book, it kind of tells you how to live your life.
Right.
And I have the best relationship with God that I've ever had. The book warns us that if we fail to enlarge our spiritual life, we will end up drinking again. And for me, to drink is to die. I'm vulnerable to alcohol. There is no doubt about that. The scoreboard shows it very clearly and all the statistics. So, I'm really grateful that there is a solution, and there are millions of people out there who feel it their responsibility to pass it on. Not only a responsibility, but a pleasure, and a joy.
Yeah.
It's a reward.
Yeah.
To get to... There are people out there that are helplessly dying, from alcoholism. It's not a fair fight. It's not even close. If you're an alcoholic and you're drinking, you're doomed.
Yeah.
And the fact that this has been going on since the 30s, and it has stayed pretty pure to what it is. There's no growth agenda. There's no, we need a bigger campus, and more acres and kids programs, and we're happy at the Frisco group to have a restroom. But it's pure selfless humanity.
Yeah.
Us looking out for each other and others. And just the whole idea that, I had no idea, that all this was going on, that I was doomed, and would have been if it hadn't have been, for you guys in that little trailer behind the church in Frisco.
A true godsend.
Yep.
I get it. So to Tony's point real quick, if you're out there and you're listening to this and you are still continuing the unfair fight, as Tony referred to it, I've heard this said in many ways, in many different rooms across the United States and Canada, and that is, there's good news and bad news. The good news is there's an answer. The bad news is it's guys like me and Tony.
Yeah, it's us.
So we'd love to have you in. All right. Well, Tony D, thank you so much. I sure did enjoy that. Once again, I want to thank Christina and Don C for going to our website, clicking on the donate tab and submitting a contribution. We welcome your thoughts and feedback. We would absolutely love to hear from you guys out there. Tell me what you think about Tony. Tell me what you think about the format of the meeting. The format of the podcast. Tell me if there's any topics that you want to hear about. Reach out to me at feedback, FEEDBACK, at SoberSpeak, that's all one word, .com. Also, I want to know how you're listening to us, right? I'd love to know how you found us for the first time. By the way, I can see, just so you know, Tony, I can see out there from the statistics we get, we're hearing from people in, I think there's approximately 28 different countries, and I'd love to know how you guys are finding our podcast. I think there's only 5 states in the United States where we have not been heard yet. So I know you're out there, and we're going to come to your doorstep if you don't tell us how you're finding us. I got your address. I'm just kidding. We can just see countries. I'm going to end it with this. Page 164 of the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Abandon yourself to God as you understand God. Admit your faults to Him and to your fellows. Clear away the wreckage of your past. Give freely of what you find and join us. We shall be with you in the fellowship of the Spirit, and you will surely meet some of us as you trudge the road of happy destiny. May God bless you and keep you until then. Keep coming back. It works if you work it.
Sucks if you don't.
He added that. I didn't ask him to add that.